Welcome to Revenue Unscripted, the show for B2B founders, CEOs, advisors, and leaders, where we unpack what really drives stronger revenue and margins. Not just product, not just process, but people and behaviors. I'm your host, Jennica Dixon, president at Slattery Sales Group. And together we'll dive into how real organizations build high-performing sales cultures, avoid costly talent mistakes, and turn complex deals into predictable growth. Joining us today is Paul Livanos, Vice President and Head of Sales at Siepe, a technology and services platform supporting credit and alternative asset managers. He leads go-to-market strategy, sales execution, and revenue growth initiatives across software and operational services. With nearly 2 decades in structured credit and private markets, Paul focuses on building high-performing sales organizations aligned to clear strategy and long-term client relationships. And today we'll pull back the curtain on scalable revenue, growing revenue before and after IPO, and having a North Star in your growth strategy. Paul, welcome to the show. It is an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Jennica.
Well, I would love to just set the stage for our listeners. Can you give them a really quick snapshot of what are you working on today?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of buzz in the private credit space. Actually, some good, some bad. The industry's been making headlines in terms of all the debt financing that goes into these data centers that are the backbone of all the AI investments, as well as what AI could potentially do for software. We've seen a lot of volatility in the software space and software sector. So we have sort of a front row seat at all of that. And that's sort of one of the challenges of being at a firm like this, is navigating through good times and through turmoil. But to some of the things you touched on, always having North Star, always being diligent with your sales and your go-to-market process, because even in good markets and bad markets, there's always opportunity. So I'm focused on building a sales team, building a go-to-market engine at Siepe. We're a private company that, as you mentioned, offers technology and outsourced operations to investment managers in the credit markets. And it's been a great journey. I've been here for 3 years now, and it's been great to sort of build a team and really see some traction.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I have so many questions to ask you, and I'm looking over my list of questions, and I've narrowed it down to about 300. So if you have just a few hours, that's all we really need. No, I'm curious because you mentioned that you're a private company right now, and I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit of the difference between private and public when
Yeah.
you are running revenue. And so I'm curious, in your experience, what changes when a company moves from early growth
Mm.
to scaling? What does sales need to look like at each stage?
Oh, that's an awesome question. Um, so you think about early growth, right? Founder-led organizations. Founders typically wear all hats. And so they very much are doing the sales themselves, in addition to building the product, in addition to hiring and raising capital and everything else that they do. But they are typically the ones who are driving that early growth and bringing on that early customer acquisition, which is so critical. Um, and then as a firm goes through that, the life cycle and matures and grows, they often tend to functionalize and build out dedicated teams to do the sales and the go-to-market function. And so I've lived that now, like with direct experience in a couple of different scenarios. And that's not always an easy transition. I think particularly given the culture of the firm, which is often set from the top. But I will say, going from the founder and the CEO doing the initial business development, to a model where you now have dedicated resources. So I can give a recent example where I was the only sales rep here for focused on this market for about 2 years. So and that was even a step from prior to that. Our CEO was doing all of the growth and business development himself, in addition to help with the board and so on. But even as one person, even as a senior leader and responsible for building out the sales team here, I only have so much bandwidth.
Yeah.
So we went from the CEO running, doing business development focused on growth, to myself as the VP of sales, to now we've hired two other senior sales reps or account executives. And I'll tell you, our bandwidth has quadrupled, just in terms of our reach, our network, the number of opportunities. When you underinvest in sales, you're actually missing out on opportunities in the market that you aren't even aware of. So it takes time, and takes some convincing to make those investments, but they absolutely do pay off when you do get to scale. And we're not done growing yet, right? Now we want to expand our team to even more resources focused on growth and sales.
Wow, you're tapping into something that I love, which is the view of the sales side of things as a focus on revenue. And I've talked to a lot of elite individual contributors. Many of them are our clients, and they talk about they can tell when they're working in an organization that treats the sales organization like it's a part of revenue versus treating the sales organization like it's a part of an expense. And those are two very different approaches. And I'm going back over our notes from our earlier
Mm,
conversation, and you had said something really wise. You said it's really a mindset shift to ask how many of our resources are really focused on growing. So, my question for you is, what is a mistake that companies make when they under resource growth?
mm. Yeah, I think that it absolutely is a mindset shift, and there is a train of thought in that, the product will sell itself, and you're right. Like, sales can be expensive. It is an investment, but it's an investment in revenue, an investment that leads to revenue and leads to growth, which is critically important for, enterprise value of a firm, and just everything, its ability to generate cash flow and do things like acquisitions. So it's a absolutely a worthwhile investment, but you sort of have to put it in those terms of like, what's the ROI? Like, what do I get for making these investments, and how do I measure that, which is really sort of tricky and nuanced. um, so yeah, we do, you know, I think if the product could sell itself, it would, you know, but it,
Yes.
it doesn't
Yes.
have arms and legs and a face, and
Mhm.
it's not able to build relationships, which is so critical, I think, in every aspect of the business. And that's one of the things we found by scaling and by making those investments. To your point about investing in resources that their primary focus is growth, that where they come in every single day and like that's their objective. They're bringing a network with them. They're bringing a reputation with them. They help elevate our brand. They help open doors and make introductions to firms and companies that we otherwise wouldn't be talking to. So I think that's very much a part of it. And then I do think about other resources in the firm that maybe their function isn't solely growth, but they should still be growth oriented, and they should still have a percentage of their time dedicated to expansion and growing the business.
Ooh, that's intriguing. Tell me more about that. That's a unique approach.
Yeah, well, I think that, it's sort of like, we all win together, and sort of rising tides, like, and this comes back to some of the North Star comment, in that, if there is true alignment, right, we aren't working against each other internally, we're working towards a common goal, but we have to be really clear on what that goal is and how we're going to get there. Um, you know, sometimes, and I'm sure you across all of your customers and your clients, you've experienced this. There's a natural friction between, sales and operations, or sales and product, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I lived it because I've been on both sides as well. Like, I started off in operations and then moved to sales. Um, and I remember when, salespeople would sell like this, big messy deal, and they would come down with like a big grin on their face. But, me and my whole team were sitting there, we're like, we're the ones who now have to clean this up and
Right.
and and deliver. But it doesn't always have to be like that, and that's actually something that I actively try to avoid. Like, it's and again, if we're aligned, if I bring the right people into the sales process, they have, an active voice. they already start interacting with the customer, and they start to develop those relationships themselves. I find that there are less surprises. We're selling better deals that we know we can support and that are well vetted and thoroughly thought out. So, but in order to do that, I need a percentage of their time. I need some
Right.
commitment to work with me, to be part of the process. And eventually, gets to the point where they start calling me and saying, "Hey, Paul, like, what's the next?" What's the next big opportunity that we're working on, or like when can I get in front of another prospect? Like that's the type of partnership that we're trying to build.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to go back to your North Star comment a minute ago. I love when we were talking earlier. You had mentioned that having a North Star is really consensus and alignment on both a vision and a strategy. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, good question. And I think it's hard, right? It's easier said than done. And I'll give you another example too. We had this discussion, and some what we proposed or even put forward is, we have a North Star of like X financial hurdle or outcome. We want to be at, whatever the exit ARR is by the end of the year. We want to grow revenue to this number by the end of the year. And that's what we're saying is our North Star. Now, in my mind, that's not a North Star. That's an outcome, right? That's the product of having true alignment and real dedicated focus. That's a byproduct, right? Well, I think what a North Star looks like is, what's going to drive the growth. It's agreement and alignment on how we're going to get there. What products, what investments do we need to make that are going to contribute to that growth, that will then produce this outcome that we want. And that's where you need alignment from everyone. You need alignment from, our people office, from the product team, from the client services team, from operations. And if everyone has agreement on, this is what's going to be the engine that drives us to get there, then it should reduce friction. And it also helps us identify what's not on the critical path. So if distractions come up all the time, like one of the biggest problems we have, I'm sure other firms have had too, going through a growth stage, is knowing what to focus on and what to prioritize, and what's noise and what not to.
Oh,
But I think if you have a clear, destination, a clear vision on how to get there, it's easier to say, wait a second, this isn't on the critical path. This doesn't move us closer to our goal. Like, why are we prioritizing that? Let's focus on the things that we agreed to focus on. And that's difficult. But if it's a clear vision and there's consensus that everyone can buy into, then I think those conversations become a lot easier.
boy, that's so true. And I'm thinking back to some of the conversations that I've had with clients over the years where they ask us to come in and help increase revenue or increase margins, and they may come in and say, we need, our goal is a 10% lift by the end of the year. And first question we ask is, where is that 10% lift going to come from? Because it sounds great to say we're going to get 10% more, but
Yeah. Yeah.
is that 10% from existing clients? Is that 10% from new clients? Is that what geographies are we talking about?
Mm.
Is your sales team completely maxed out and they can't go get more? Are they working on the pipeline already? I mean, if it's brand new, how long is the cycle to go get new revenue? Because if it's in some industries, I know, like I'm thinking of healthcare specifically, there is a 12 to 18-month sales cycle. So if you're
Right.
looking, let's say it's February, you're looking at December and you need to be up by 10%. That ship
Right.
sailed a few months ago. So
Mm.
where is this going to come from is always the question that we ask. So I love the way that you break that down.
And it's a good question to ask too, because what I think that, what I find, and I'm curious to know what you find too, is you ask different people and they might have different, answers, right?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah. So that, no wonder there's sort of this internal friction of, I think we should do this and I think we should do that. All right. So I guess I'm sure that you find that too, right?
I do. In fact, if you put the entire executive leadership team in a room and you ask an even apparently more basic question than that, which is, what do we sell? Even then, you will
Yeah.
have a variety of answers because
Mm.
engineering's view is different from revenue's view, is different from ops's view. I mean, everybody's got a different view on
Mm.
what it is that we're really truly bringing to the marketplace that's unique. And to your point about growth and, the North Star versus the goal versus the strategy,
Hmm. Hmm.
understanding what it is that we really truly bring to the marketplace that has value and is different from our competitors. That's key to protecting those priorities that you talked about a moment ago, because there are so many distractions.
Hmm.
And it's
Exactly.
funny how many different answers we can get.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's good to go through that process. One other thing, in response to what you said, was setting realistic expectations, right? And so by coming in and asking those questions and like realizing, that there isn't consensus on like what are our products, what do we sell, how do we go to market, what are our goals, and what's going to drive that, right? Um, but yeah, it's yeah, I just think it's interesting how different, how you can have such different responses to the same questions on things that you might think are well known or widely accepted. But you
Yes.
have to go through the exercise of asking, but having realistic goals of, to your point, you have a 12 to 18 month sales cycle, and you're looking for an outcome in less than 12 months, right? Like, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? That's not an outcome you can achieve, right?
Right.
And so, but by digging in and by asking those questions, again, I think setting realistic goals, that and get alignment. And I have another story too on,
Yeah.
what is product, right? Even that, what products do we sell, right? Is something that you think you should have consensus on, but internally there could be different points of view, and they're all valid. And that's the thing.
Right.
It just requires that dialogue and that discussion, to get consensus. So, I take the point of view of what we sell is what we can license, is what customers can subscribe to, or they can buy, or they can come to our website, and what's listed. Like, that's a product. I think there's more of an engineering view, in the sense of, our products are built up of components, right? Shared components that, so again, that in conjunction, deliver value to our customers. So I think there is a middle ground, but there are definitely different points of view. Um, we actually had we had a speaker come in at our last um, annual meeting, and we had had an exercise where we had, you found a partner, and you stood up with one hand behind your back and the other hand in front of you, as though you were doing an arm wrestle. And they said the goal was to see how many times, one of you could pin the other person, and whoever had the most pins was the winner. And what you had is a lot, like, pretty much everyone in the room was like, struggling and trying to arm wrestle each other. And then there was one group, one pair, that talked about it, and they said, "Look, I'm just going to let you pin me 100 times, and we're going to win this thing, right?" And that's exactly what they did. And there was some prize and all that. But the point is, it's like, think about what's the outcome, what are we trying to produce, which is really as a positive outcome or positive result for our customers. And so,
Mm.
that got, just, when you come across these conflicting points of view, that was a good exercise to help think about, our goals are actually aligned. Like, we actually want the same thing, right? And so we're not working against each other. Let's work together to produce that. So I thought it was a good exercise.
I love that. That's fantastic. That's kind of cunning on their parts. I like that.
Yeah. It was
As
good.
as you look at your differentiation, like we were talking about a minute ago, I mean, it could be different things to different people within your organization. How do you pressure test that in the marketplace, just to check your own internal beliefs? Like, this is what I think we're bringing to the marketplace. How do you pressure test that
Mm,
reality?
mm, that's a very good question. And that's how you get buy-in. And I actually recently took a course on like executive presence and influence, because you could have the best ideas in the world, but if nobody adopts them or hears them or incorporates them, then it doesn't really add value. So one technique that I've been working on is sort of building, kind of like small inner circles. I'm a big believer in documenting your ideas. Like, you have to put it on paper objectively, so someone else can view it, can, dispute it, can opine or comment on it. And but I'll find, like, small groups, maybe a step below the executive level, to get to sort of you said like pressure test or put some ideas out there and get reactions. And it's more than just words. Like it's got to be something on paper that you can talk to and look at and objectively say. And I think that's how you build consensus too. Because if you get buy-in from different business leaders or group leaders or managers on here's how this is a map of how we're structured as an organization. Like, do you agree? Right?
Oh,
you know
right.
and maybe the answer is no, or maybe it's you might be surprised with what you find out. But then after you sort of and as you go through that process, you're building consensus. So by the time you do make a presentation to the executive team or to the CEO or the board, like you've already validated it, and you've already even got buy-in too from other stakeholders. So it's I think it's also not an easy task to accomplish, but I think that's one technique that seems to be working.
That's fantastic. You just reminded me of a story. I had a professor, a business professor in college, and he was telling about one of the enterprises that he had worked at, and the leadership team would get together and they might come to the table with different opinions. And at the end of the discussion, they would come to some kind of conclusion and they would write it down. There was something that you said about writing it down that really kind of
Mm.
makes it real. And then it was a requirement that every person around the table had to sign it.
Oh wow.
Even if it wasn't the outcome that they had been gunning for, every person around the table had to sign it that this is the conclusion that we came to, so that that way nobody could leave and be like, "I didn't say that. That wasn't my thing."
Yeah.
Just because 'cause we're humans, there's there's always that risk, and I always thought that was a really good idea to make people sign off like, "Yes, this is what we decided, and it's
Yeah.
written."
Yeah, because it's so true. Because there's someone might leave the room and have a completely different understanding and not vocalize it. So yeah, that's absolutely a good technique. I think things like that work.
Indeed. I'm curious about like pre-IPO and post-IPO.
Mm.
I love the fact that you had talked earlier about you enjoy working at private companies because you're not beholden to the quarterly cycle. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what does that change about decision making, pipeline management, the way that you approach your work when you're not beholden to that quarterly cycle?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so I actually went through one in one of my roles. We went from privately owned to publicly owned. So in managing that transition was really good experience. I do think that I think there's pros and cons of managing in both environments. So like some of the pros I took away from managing under a publicly owned company was really like the discipline in forecasting. And like you mentioned at the very top, like predictable growth, right? Like so that's it doesn't matter if you're public or private, like getting really good at that skill set is like super important. And so, things like testing forecast accuracy and like every month making making a prediction. And as you get closer to quarter end, like your prediction should be, that variance should decrease and should be very, very close to reality. And over time, you build data and you build trends and you get really good at it. And so like that's actually a practice that I brought with me to the private company, even though we aren't beholden to that quarterly reporting cycle. And that I wanted to institute here to start building that early, which again I felt was a good practice. And
Nice.
then I think on the flip side, again, typically being part of a public company, it's larger, it's a bit more functionalized, the groups, and it could seem that some of the incentives are misaligned in the sense of I felt that sales was very separate, like from the business, almost under a different umbrella. Um, and so it felt like there was a disconnect, and we had to sort of rebuild some of those partnerships, which took time. But even like the reporting chains were completely different. Um, but and that was something that I felt had we had lost from going from being privately owned, whereas everyone had a seat at the table, right? We sat side by side with management, with product, and had real input. Like sales, I'm sure you can attest to this, right? We sort of represent the voice of the customer and the voice of the market.
Yes.
Um, we aren't isolated. It's quite the opposite. We're out there every single day having interactions and talking directly with potential users and customers. So I missed that. I missed having a role of being at the table with the business, and not feeling like we're separate, or and then at the end of the day, like what does the business want? They want sales to deliver good opportunities, right? That are, we talk about ICP, like your ideal customer profile, like that we can support, that will produce happy, referenceable clients, and that's scalable, right? That ultimately is produces good margins and good revenue for the business, right? And again, if you're too bifurcated, that becomes challenging, because
Right.
of the misaligned incentives. And then you have, like, the quarterly cycle, right? Where it's like you have to, every quarter you have quotas to make, and private, in the private world, I always say it's not about when you make the sale, it's about if you make the sale. And I kind of like that too, because it felt like there was some artificial, like, pressuring of customers to sign by a certain date. I don't know if I'm sure you've heard or seen this, but like on, New Year's Eve at like 10 or 11 p.m., like, I mean, who's signing a contract on New Year's Eve at 10
Right.
or 11 p.m.?
It's,
So
I think it's the people, the prospects who know that that's the best time to milk concessions out of desperate salespeople.
exactly, it goes two ways. Exactly,
Uh-huh.
exactly.
They
And
know
you get,
exactly when your quarter ends.
yeah, exactly. But then you got to ask yourself, like, what's best for the business,
Right.
and is that really, and again, it could differ, widely from one company to another, or from one industry to another.
And in your experience, you had mentioned, in the public side, really having the structures in place to ensure that the pipeline is predictable. What are some of the things that you would share with the CEO to help them get their pipeline more predictable? Because I know that's kind of a black box for
Yes.
for a lot of organizations. Sales says it's on the forecast, but how much fiction is there?
Yeah. Yeah, I think some, like, tools and data work. Like, there's a lot of good, like, platforms out there. Obviously, every firm should have a CRM, customer relationship management platform. On top of that, there are other partnerships or plugins. We actually signed up for a platform called Gong, which is really, really helpful.
Yeah, we have a
It's
lot of clients who love that. Mhm.
Yeah, and honestly, it's good from a management perspective, because you get real visibility into the pipeline, in terms of what's real and what's not. And it's good for someone like our CEO, or someone, like our president, or anyone in a management seat, where you can literally just go in and ask it questions, natural language processing, and it will come back and tell you the latest. Oh, so and so had, this many touch points, or this many calls, or this is how qualified an opportunity is or isn't. So I think that those types of tools are helpful, but I also say that it doesn't take away the need for, like, real conversation.
Right.
So we I do establish, like, a certain, like, cadence, for different meetings and interactions. So we provide a monthly update to management from sales perspective on, key deals, wins, losses, renewals, and that actually serves as the precursor to our quarterly board meetings. So we're in the habit of doing that on a monthly basis. Then on top of that, we have a biweekly pipeline call, where we communicate, only qualified deals that are within the next 60 or 90 days that are going to close. And then we have, a weekly, just the sales team meeting, to kind of review and make sure that all of our data is, like, our deals are up to date. So some of those things have been helpful, but it's still not easy. And there's always the question of, like, when is this closing? When do we need to start hiring? Like, if you start hiring after you've won the mandate, that's probably too late.
Yes.
You're behind
Yes.
the ball. So you need to find some middle ground, but also nobody wants to hire a bunch of resources to have them just sit there, if an
Right.
opportunity is, so it's like, that's why it's never a science, but it's like, some of those techniques do help. And I'm sure you have plenty of others to recommend as well.
I love this. What you're describing is a very real concern at a lot of companies. I mean, I'm thinking especially in the manufacturing space, if we're going to sell this project, we need to make sure that we have enough people on hand to do it. If
Yes.
we sell 3 of those, oh dear, do
Yeah,
we
right.
have the people? On the other hand, if we don't close 2 of the 3, now we've got people sitting around idle, and it's really hard to make strategic decisions, but that's what makes them strategic decisions, and
Yes.
they're not easy black and white. If they were, anybody could make them.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And another way I think about it too is like the sales cycle. And I think sales, what we try to do is simplify things, right? Simplify and translate. If you can express your meaning with as few words as possible, that means you're doing your job. But I think the sales cycle, the sales process is originate, develop, close, right? Like those are three broad categories that can I think
those are
generally
great
be
categories.
and be yeah and but like and then I think about like I think there's this common mindset of like, oh, it's here earlier, we need a top side by 10% by the end of the year. So what are we going to do? We're going to hire another salesperson, right? And everyone thinks it's linear. It's like, oh, I hire a salesperson, and then if I want to double that, I need two salespeople, three or five. But and again, in some cases that in some industries, some markets, some products, that might be the right answer. But what I find for where we operate is thinking more about providing resources to support the different phases of the sales cycle. And so, to that example you just brought up in manufacturing about, do we have enough people, or we went in, is it too early or too late to hire? Um, I think in addition to just hiring account execs or sales reps, you also need a staff. And again, this goes back to growth-oriented resources, to assist with like the qualification, the scoping, and the requirements of those engagements. And that gives you a sense of, how real is it? When is it coming? I think in sales, we make two commitments. We make a commitment to timing and a commitment to price, and in
Right,
order to do those things accurately, like you need to really understand what's being asked of us. Now you could just leave it to the sales rep to do it on their own, on his or her own, but at the end of the day, you want to build out a more scalable and formal process with resources who are really like technically attuned to like asking the questions, building processes, building lists, even going into the client's office and sitting down side by side and making sure we know what's being asked so we can make accurate predictions on, or accurate commitments on timing and price. So yeah, those are, so I think it's not just hire more salespeople. It's like
right.
hire people to support different phases of the sales cycle.
I love that. That's very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
As I am curious if a private company is preparing for an exit or an IPO, how should the leaders evolve their sales rigor without maybe bringing the wrong pressure to the table?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think also even post like IPO, at least in my experience, I felt a ton of pressure to really like deliver and over deliver, and that was in 2020, which was a challenging time for everyone.
Ouch.
Yeah. So it was like but I think the lead up, I honestly I think it's if you've done it the right way and you've already instilled good practices, it's just more of what you're doing, versus like taking a hard pivot or to sort of to position the firm um differently. But I do think that maybe like gradual changes versus like large changes in terms of pivoting like where you're going in the market, unless it's necessary. So like, for example, like if you come in and you say, all right, hey team, like your quota is going to go up by 200% next year, and it's like, well, I wonder why. And
Whew.
yeah, and good luck. And like, well, what are we, do we have new products to sell or something else? Like how we're going to be, that doesn't seem achievable. But I do think post going public, it's again, I feel like there's a different discipline, a different set of requirements, um, and then there's that pressure to really like overperform. And in our case, when we were acquired by a public company, and we didn't want them to feel like they had buyer's remorse, right? We
Ooh,
felt
good
like
point.
they had just made this large investment and now we had to deliver in what was a challenging time. Um, and at the same time we two cultures sort of corporate cultures sort of blending and merging and evolving. So it was definitely but then things settled, the market normalized, we adopted a lot of the processes that they already had in place that were at scale, and it ended up being actually like really successful for a couple of years.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And after IPO, I know that sometimes after a company goes public, now there is a attention to detail every quarter. There's a lot of attention
Yes.
to detail, and I'm curious, what advice would you give somebody who's in an industry with longer sales cycles? I mean, let's use healthcare as an example because they're
Yeah.
notorious for having long sales cycles. How do you manage the fact that you are looking at a 12 to 18-month cycle, but you need movement, answers, progress every 90 days? How do you reconcile those
Mm.
2 things?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question as well. Yeah, I think you have to come up with a agreed set of KPIs that you can demonstrate movement on, like in the absence of signed contracts. It's so what are like the top 5 or top 10 things that really demonstrate progress. And that's also one of the things that some of the tools, especially now, some of these AI tools out there, they can actually analyze the data. Um, and based on past performance can tell you, like, are you seeing behaviors, are you seeing even like words that the customers are using, are you multi-threading, like do you have buy-in for more than one contact or more than one group at the prospect. Those are all indications of a buying decision, right? And it's based on past performance, like where have we won in the past, what do those opportunities look like, what was that journey, and compare that to where we are today in a particular opportunity. So I think you have to look at some of those data points, and again, like critically important, which is why again it's an investment not just in people but in the technology and the platforms as well. Um, to sort of produce that. We have very long sales cycles as well. Like we sell software and we sell outsourced operations. I think the life cycle, once a software sale is made, like the next opportunity for a customer to change platforms is at least 5 to 10 years. you know,
Wow.
yeah, we'll talk to a prospect and they'll say, what would, we always try to understand when is their contract termination day or when can they exit their current contract. And oftentimes it's, 2 years, 2.5 years, but then we work backwards and we say, all right, well, you need to give 6 months notice and you need, this much time for parallel and this much time for onboarding. But like, so that means we have to start today. you know
Right.
so
Yes.
so let's start building that plan and like working towards that so you can meet those deadlines. But um you can
That's
measure some
fantastic.
of that activity. Yeah, did you build a project plan? Did you how much scoping have you done? How many stakeholders have you met with? Have you talked to commercials or not? So all of those things can be sort of indicators that you can determine, like, is this a real buyer? Are they trending towards, how confident are you in buying? And all of that plays into forecasting too.
I'm curious then, as you build those KPIs and as you decide what to look at, there might be different opinions on your team or
Mm.
among the leaders as to what metrics we should be tracking. And having having worked with a lot of companies in the past, I know that it can be very easy for the people on the front lines to mistake, this is a buying signal, or they're really super interested. And sometimes when we start working with a client, that's the first thing we have to unwind is, no, 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 interest is a red flag. That's bad. That's
Yeah.
not an indicator that they're ready to go through the pain of change. How do
Mm.
you ensure that the right metrics are in place rather than maybe the tempting happy ears
Yeah.
metrics?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I feel like salespeople in general feel like, aren't don't love KPIs,
That's true.
not, not to generalize, but if they're the right ones, they should, right? And if it's, you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it, like, for, oh, I'm holding them accountable and I want to show that they're adding value, but like again, like this comes back to our goals are all aligned, like we all are working towards the same outcome here, um, and so So how do you know that you actually have meaningful ones, and ones that aren't just there for the sake of saying, hey, we got a data point, we got a metric?
They said they were
Um,
interested. Yes,
yeah.
10%. Like, no.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like I know there's a bunch of like qualification protocol or methodology, right? Like Medic, we use Medic. There are other ones out there as well. And again, it's like you have to sort of tailor it to your, again, your sales cycle and your process. But I do like those things. Like, have you asked the right questions? Like if you, and so when I conduct my weekly, sales team meetings and my one-on-ones, I look at it as an inspection, and it's like asking the questions and seeing if they have the answers readily available. If they don't, then that means they need to go back and do further qualifying.
Yes.
So something like, do you know what is their contract end date? Who else are we up against? If you can't name the other competitors, then like you don't know if we're really in this or not, right?
Right.
And then making our CRM is at the right stage. Like, maybe this isn't as qualified as you thought, or making the forecast category. Maybe, this isn't as, you shouldn't be committing this to forecast just yet if you haven't really asked those questions. And, we all learn the hard way. Like I've been down that road of like, nobody likes surprises, but there's a big opportunity, 9-month sales cycle, and we're almost at the finish line, only to find out that there was an incumbent in there the whole time that we're competing against that we didn't know about. And honestly, it ultimately comes back to, me and the sales process of like, we should have validated that or vetted it earlier to be aware. And so those things are learning experiences, right? So now the
Right.
next time I know to ask, and I know to dig in a bit, and to help us know how qualified opportunities are.
That's fantastic. The people side of things, I'm curious, and I am keeping an eye on the clock, and I'm aware that I do have to land this plane at some point, but I have so many great questions for you because you have so many deep
Oh, this is great.
insights into both sides. You've been there pre-IPO, post-IPO.
Mm,
You've been in a variety of situations, and I'm curious about the people side.
mm,
You made a
mhm.
really good observation that sometimes leaders think that if they add a salesperson, there's a linear relationship
Yes.
between, then we will get this many more sales. We can expect that, and it doesn't always play out that way, of course. And so I'm curious. I know in our experience, sometimes clients want, because one of the things that we help them do is we help them put the right talent in the right seats on the sales team side. And it's not uncommon for the leadership to say, I know, this guy's a rock star over at this other company. Let's poach him. We really want
Mm,
this person, or I know she's crushing it over at our top competitor. Let's go bring her over. And or even if they're just assessing candidates, this person crushed it at another company. But those skills don't always translate into the new role. And you and I had talked about this a little bit on our last conversation. Can you kind of give us some insight into your view of that, where,
mm,
leaders want to bring somebody in because they crushed it at their last company, but there might be some misalignment. I'm curious, where do you see that breakdown? What are some of the early warning signs, and
mm.
how can a leader prevent that?
Hmm. Yeah, 100%. This happens very, all the time, in terms of, I know someone, I've worked with someone, they were an all-star here. Let me bring them over. It's my person. And but you got to ask, why were they so great there? And maybe
Oh,
they were great like 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, right? But
right.
but maybe, and where were they working at that time when they were great? Like, in what stage in the life cycle of the company were they in? Right? Like, what made them great? And
Those are great questions.
yeah, because like you might be great at like the startup phase, right? Or like the early growth phase, but like, at this point, like, that was 20 years ago, and like now, where are they coming to now? Like, we're already mature, we're already at scale, we're already, are they going to be as great here? So like having that, just because someone doesn't necessarily mean they are the best fit. I also think, like, in the internal relationships, right? Like, how are they going to jive, and are they going to be able to connect with other team members and stakeholders? And it's like building an internal network, and are they the right fit? Um, so I think, what we had talked about too is, like, I always look at like domain expertise, and then and then the role, like the acumen of the role. So like, you could have someone who's really disciplined at sales, who knows the acumen, who knows, the hard skills, the soft skills of what does it mean to be a good salesperson, and someone who can just, go out there and drive and meet quota and is very comfortable being in a quota carrying role. Um, but they might not have any domain expertise. They might not know anything about this industry, and therefore they'll have no credibility in talking to their customers.
Right.
And so, and vice versa. So it is hard. It's typically a limited playing field of how do you find someone that really has both, to be effective in a sales role. And then also I do think about like farming and growing talent, and people who step into the role, but who are learning. But you need to create a path for those people who can then take that next step. There's a couple of schools of thought there too. It's like, everyone can't constantly switch roles. Like you need like a sales engineer, you need someone who's really good at that, who's comfortable in that role. They're not seeking a quota carrying role, but like that's what they're good at, and that's and you need those people as well. But yeah, those are all good questions to evaluate, and which I'm sure you do a lot of, right? And you look at
Oh yeah.
their history, the fit, the culture, their domain expertise, and all of that. So
Yeah. It is a challenge. I mean, every human is unique, and that
yes,
adds to the complexity of it.
exactly.
So, oh, I want to make sure I honor your time here. So, lightning round, I'll ask
Yeah.
one question to wrap us up here. And again, Paul, thank you so much. There's so many gems that you have just been dropping freely here that
Oh, thank you,
I'm
Jennica.
overwhelmed. There's so much great information. Um, Lightning round. Let me see here. If you could offer one piece of advice to a founder or a CEO and they're looking down the barrel of an IPO, what would you tell them to lock into place now to ensure that they make it through that finish line? So not just to it, but through it with strong
Mm.
revenue and margins. And I'm, of course, specifically thinking of when humans are part of their go to market strategy. So when they've got human sales teams as part of that go to market strategy. So what would you tell them to lock into place
Mm.
now to ensure they make it through that finish line with strong revenues and margins in place?
Interesting. I would say, lightning round answer. I would say, make sure expectations are clear, and
Oh,
and
that's good.
yeah, and just be certain, like, again, no matter what the market's doing, like account for sort of the worst case scenario and be ready to still survive and still thrive and meet your targets even in challenging environments. And have that type of discipline that you always have to be focused on growth and getting those outcomes in all environments under all circumstances. So like pressure testing your plan, your go to market model, the deals in your pipeline to make sure that they're real, that they're well qualified, and that they are in fact in alignment with the type of business that helps move us forward as a firm and as a company. Not just chasing revenue for the sake of chasing revenue. Um, and
Oh,
so making sure that there's like that expectation is sort of set early, and then that sort of carries through, um, you know, through IPO and beyond.
wow.
Yeah.
There is a lot there, and I promised that I wouldn't
And
unpack it, but
and I just have to say, I love and admire your passion for sales, and it's such an interesting thing. But you have so much insight and so many different perspectives. So this has
thank
been
you.
an absolute pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was raised by 2 people who, I mean, they came from very rough backgrounds, and they got their start in the corporate world through sales. And I had a lovely childhood because 2 people were willing to sell and then become entrepreneurs, and that's a unique perspective when you're growing up, and
Mm,
it's not a normal, I think, outlook.
yeah.
I was a fish surrounded by that water, and I have come to absolutely love it. And it's my passion to really kind of unlock some of that puzzle because
Mm,
it's a variable. We're humans, and I know that there's so many leaders who are excited for the death of a salesman. Like
yeah.
they're hoping it's going to happen. AI is promising it, but the humans are still with us, and
Mm,
how do we move forward even with the humans? And it can be a variable landscape, but it's a beautiful thing. And I love empowering
Yeah.
the good humans
And
in there to win.
And I actually think Jenica too. I'm curious. Yeah, I think salespeople make great leaders too, and make great business
Yes.
owners, right? And
Yes.
and investors sort of want and expect growth. So having that that mindset and that built into your DNA is like it's I actually think it's really good. It's really effective.
It is. Well,
Yeah.
it's a skill. Only 3% of the workforce is even willing to sell. So it's a rare it's a rare desire, and those are the ones that are willing. So when you find somebody who's willing and able, whew,
Yeah,
snatch them
exactly.
up. So, Paul, thank you so much for your time today. It has been an absolute privilege to have you on here, and I know that your insights are of immense value, not only to me here, but also to our listeners. So thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, where can they find you actually? Are you on LinkedIn?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I use LinkedIn every day, and I think that LinkedIn's a great place to network and to reach out. So I would recommend LinkedIn. Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. We'll include a link in our show notes. And to our listeners, thank you so much for your time. I know it's precious and we deeply appreciate you spending it with us here. And make sure that you have subscribed so that you don't miss an episode. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day and cheers to many wins. Thanks.